Warning. This podcast contains terrifying discussions about organizational leadership, sense-making, and human resources. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to the Sense and Signal podcast, the Halloween episode. I'm TARKER, and I'm in my mad lab, and I'm with my co-host Jodah JENSEN, who is sitting on his back.
Yes, it's the skeletons of my past. They do not release me. They haunt me, and I cannot get rid of them.
Well, you might want to get some ointment for that, Jodah.
No, I think I got something. Maybe a little.
Yeah.
Bothers me.
Yeah. Maybe a crypt keeper or something like that. They can put that thing where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. I got to go to a dermatologist. I'll deal with it.
Anyways, welcome to the Halloween edition of the Sense and Signal podcast. What we're calling the Haunted Podcast edition. And we're going to be having a lot of fun today talking about 4 different horror films that we think speak to organizational leadership and sense-making. So what are we going to be talking about today, Jodah?
We are going to be talking about 4, and the first one up is The Thing.
And then we're going to talk about Frankenstein.
And then we are going to talk about The Shining.
And finally, we'll wrap up with what I think we both think is the best film of them all, Q The Winged Serpent.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. Definitely best.
You need it. It's on Criterion Channel right now. Go check it out. We're going to dive right in. So like, subscribe, comment, do all those things. Keep watching and enjoy our tour.
Stab, you guys stab.
Stab that like button.
Stab the like button.
Stab it again and again and again. And get your friends to stab it too.
Yep.
Make it a group stabbing.
Yep.
and enjoy our analysis of these 4 classic horror films.
Anyone messes with me and the whole camp goes.
Yeah, hey Dan, so let's kick this off. I was thinking with a movie that scared the living daylights out of me when I was a kid. I saw it when I was probably way too young, although I bet somebody might have seen it when they were younger and maybe endured it better than I did. But it really scared me. And that is not the original, but the 81? Is it 81 or 80?
82, I think.
82 Thing. I think there are some lessons to be learned in there. I think there are some interesting things, but that movie, I don't know about you, but I think it hit on the themes of uncertainty and suspicion. And you know what? I'm not sure about you, but I've experienced that in my workplace before.
Oh, I've definitely experienced that at work, and I've seen that within organizations. But I want to take a couple steps back to talk about this movie, The Thing.
Okay.
As you rightly say, there's actually 3 versions of The Thing. There's a 1982 version by John Carpenter. There's an old, I'm thinking 1960s, 50s version, and then there's a recent one in the teens, the 2000 teens or whatever,
which wasn't bad. It was not bad. It was no John Carpenter movie, which he's near.
No, the John Carpenter's probably the superior of the 3, and I haven't watched the new one, so I can't really say, but I'll take your word. John Carpenter's a master. And I'll be honest. When I was a little kid, I watched it or portions of it, and I was bored. But now I was coming back to it, and as an adult and watching it based on your encouragement for this episode, I was like, well, there's some really important philosophical and to your point, organizational leadership themes embedded in that movie.
Yeah. I mean, obviously when I was a kid, I didn't walk and go, hey, I wonder how I'm going to apply this to my work experience as I get older. Right? Although who knows? It might have been,
when we have that alien invasion.
It could have invaded my psyche somehow. I might treat people very suspiciously, concerned they're going to turn out to be some sort of alien clone. I don't know. But yeah, it's
How do you know they're not?
how do you know they're not? So let's if you mind if we kick off with the idea here talking about this. So we're Dan and I are kind of working this through to see how we're going to line this up to organizations. And I was thinking it might be fun, at least for this particular movie, is what would happen like an alien invasion. Like, yeah, there's some lessons to be learned around and analogies with the actual alien and the reactions. But what would happen? What would, let's just take a second here. What would happen if actually your organization succumbed to the events of the thing? How would your organization react?
The audience might not have watched the thing, so let's kind of recap,
yes,
right?
Okay, go for it.
So you got this team of scientists or people in Antarctica, right? And they are at a research station, we can assume. And unbeknownst to them, an alien spacecraft has crashed in that area, and there's a creature that has been unearthed by a bunch of Norwegians, because those Norwegians always kind of like to start trouble. And the movie opens with a helicopter crew of Norwegians chasing this poor dog through the Arctic plain, or through the snow, and they're shooting at this poor wolf-like dog, and you feel kind of sorry for the dog. It's like, but he's good. And you know what? The one thing that dog does right is it knows its active shooter response strategy, because it zigzags like through the snow so nobody can get a clean shot at it. It's a smart dog.
Well, to be honest,
that's because
it's not a dog. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, well, it's a wolf, but it's inhabited. It's been inhabited by the alien creature.
At a cellular level. At a cellular level, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because this thing is kind of like a virus that infects people's cells and replicates, so it becomes essentially a clone of the original being.
And you're never even sure if, like, the clone. They kind of hint that the person who's cloned might not even know. I don't know. I always kind of wondered, did the clone person did they always know they were cloned, or that was something
there's some ambiguity there.
Yeah, they never really kind of went into that, so they weren't sure of themselves if they were clones, which I think also has some implications from an organizational perspective, like, where do you begin and end, and what are your ideas, so
yeah. So anyways, the cute little doggy invades this new camp of people. The Norwegians die trying to kill the dog, and so the dog ends up at this new place, and quickly the virus begins to spread. And Kurt Russell plays, who's he play again?
Kurt Russell?
He plays the lead.
He's the lead, yeah, he's the lead.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, he's the lead, who's kind of like this macho, quiet helicopter pilot dude who kind of leads everybody in trying to address this alien invasion within their Antarctic compound.
Yeah, and the crux of it is that, again, as I think if you haven't gathered yet, is that throughout this, and we're not going to do a movie review of this here, but which I recommend anybody go see it. But the crux of it is that this alien is taking over bodies, and basically, how does this team first acknowledge that this event is even occurring, and secondarily, once they've identified it, how do they know who's been affected and who hasn't? Which, being originally a 1950s movie, it was all spawned from the concerns about the what's it called, communism. Yeah, so it's all about who's who and what do they know and all that kind of stuff.
Kind of like the invasion of the body snatchers.
Completely, the same. That came out at the same time. It's another form of that movie. So going back to the thought, so like I was kind of thinking, like, what would happen if if your organization like was infected by this thing, this creature, how would your organization, and let's just pretend for whatever reason it was a normal company, not whatever reason, a normal company, you come and go as you wish, you're not stuck out in the middle of the snow, it's your job. But what would happen? How would your organization, how would your organization react to like this? I mean, what would be like, how long would it take for your organization to find out that something like this was occurring? Let me first ask that question.
Oh, God, that's interesting. Well, I mean, I want to take a step back again and get back to that moral panic of around communism back in the 1950s, and it's kind of interesting that the root of that is being very concerned about the moral character inside of a person, because you have the exterior, what you can see, but do they have the right ideology inside of them? Is that, are they capitalistic or are they communistic?
Right.
And we can see waves of that in many different manifestations throughout history. I definitely think we see it today too in organizations, which I'm not going to get into it because it's a little partisan and political probably, but which is not the nature of this podcast. But I don't know. I don't think my organization would be very effective at addressing it.
Yeah,
I feel like and I think it's a natural human dimension to this, where there's a lot of denial, and you see it in the movie too, right? There's a lot of denial about what's going on and needing proof, and so denial is the first thing that you have to overcome, and then you get this realization that through the scientific method, right? Sort of, cinematic scientific method, which is not really true scientific method. This talking computer, this computer basically spelling out, that if this virus gets out of this compound, it's going to affect all of humanity. Within 24 hours.
That was a writer's method of getting us ramped.
Yeah. It works to a degree, but it's. No, actually, it doesn't work to a degree. It kind of pulls you out of the movie. But I guess that gets to what I find most interesting about the film from an ethical point of view, is around ethical leadership, and that they have to make a choice. They know they're all going to die at some point in the film, that there's no way they're going to escape the compound
late
that they're
into
on.
the film. After all things break down, you've jumped quite a bit there. I mean, there are a lot of things where they might have been able to solve problems, and then it gets to the point where they're like, you know what? We're not gonna survive this, and so we're gonna mitigate the damage to the rest of the world. But I think that there's a lot of stuff they could have possibly done before that.
Well, let's go to that, Jodah, before we get to their moral choice at the end around self-sacrifice. I think your argument is that the toxic culture within that dynamic of men, right, inhibits them from being able to solve the problem.
Well, yeah, I think that's really what the movie is about. I mean, it is about mistrust, right? It feeds into like it was derived from, again, the red wave scare of the 50s, and so it literally spawned from the idea of how do you know your person next to you is who you think they are? How do you know you think you are? Because remember, people were thinking from the red wave that you were being brainwashed, so you might not even know you were brainwashed, so you could have been an agent and not even know it, so I do think there's a mistrust. And I was reading an article recently by Shelley D. Smith from Forbes. The article was titled "Lack of Trust Can Make Workplaces Sick and Dysfunctional." So, and it actually associates like a virus, right? I mean, mistrust can feed into and break the relationships down, and we don't know what the relationships were of this team beforehand, right? It could have been good, it could have been bad, but what we saw is that this introduction of this novel virus, it could be a novel, if from an organization perspective, a novel unknown, right? Something that's in there that you don't have an automatic response for, and so how does your team fix that? And this person suggests there are several signs, or 7 signs of mistrust in the organization. And they are: 1, no conflict or controversy, which I think is kind of interesting, meaning like people are too afraid to actually battle each other.
To raise issues.
Yeah. No accountability was another one, which is also really interesting. Few decisions, little actions, no results, kind of feeds back into those first 2. Decisions made without the team, meaning leadership doesn't trust basically the team, so they just make decisions. Over-attended meetings, I've seen that, where everybody distrusts everybody, so everybody has to be in the room, right? And it kind of, it's kind of like that scene with when he's in there with the blood, and you don't know who's who and what's doing what. He's got people tied up, and he's about to put this, the hot poker into the blood. I feel like I've been in meetings like that. where you're kind of like you're in a hot room situation, and everybody's kind of in there, and
we're going to test to see if you're infected.
Yeah, to
Are
some
you going to
degree.
say something that's so outside of the orthodoxy
That's right.
of our institutional culture that we're going to be able to identify that you are an interloper?
That's
You're one of
right.
the aliens
That's
we don't
right.
want in our organization anymore.
Yeah, and then the last two are excessive oversight, which again is like it kind of reminds me of decisions made about teams, and number 7, people withhold critical information, basically protectionism. Again, we saw that in this movie, right? People were
Siloing.
they were totally siloing, right? Maybe they were kind of holding, they weren't telling everybody everything because they were concerned the other person might have been affected. They weren't sure. I mean, they're all those things. I think to some degree were reflective in that movie.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I would say that it's even very transactional in their engagement with each other. There's not a lot of understanding or time. They're saying there's not a lot of time that they're spending, and maybe they shouldn't because it's in a crisis moment, where they're being invaded by an alien virus in a sense. But there's not a lot of time spent on recognizing that we're going through this traumatic experience together, right? And it's like you either do this or why didn't you do the right thing at this particular moment? No time for really processing what's going on or really engaging in sense making and understanding the group dynamics.
Yeah, and
So
and that's interesting because a lot of, again, going back to sense making in the sense making world in the post industrial age, you really want to have that time for sense making, and sometimes unknowns come into a situation that are so cosmically unknown to whatever you're trying to do that there was no way to prepare or plan for it. And so how far do you take that planning? And there's this level of uncertainty. And before we go on to the existential thing you want to talk about, I want to bring up the uncertainty aspect of this movie as well, right? So there's mistrust, but then there was this whole level of uncertainty that was imposed upon this team, and how do they engage in that? And uncertainty, of course, part of the uncertainty was that manifested of the mistrust. And again, another person, a Dr. Karen was her name, from Organizational Relationship Systems Coach. I'll put her website in a link. She identifies several things as ways of kind of managing uncertainty, because we all have to deal with that. And she lists out 5 things or 6 things, and I'll read those off. Recognize what you know and you don't know. So you can totally supplant that on top of this movie. Were they trying to figure out what they knew and didn't know? And yeah, they were, right? And they were grasping at straws. Accept what's out of your control. That's when they said, you know what? We don't control this. We're going to all die here, and we're going to save the world. They accepted something they couldn't control this thing, but they could mitigate damage. And that we can get to that in a second. I think that kind of revolves around what you're talking about. Ask for help when appropriate, right? Kind of scary in this situation because you weren't sure who your friend was or your enemy was. Think positively. I don't know how they could have. Look at this monster eating. It'd been pretty hard to be positive.
Yeah, I don't think there's one character in that movie who has a positive mindset. No, they're definitely not thinking in terms of growth mindset. It's like, we're all going to die.
But, could you imagine if they written in a positive character when it was like, hey, it's not that bad. Hey, we can get out of this, like all the way through it. And then finally, building resilience, right? And that's kind of what I think they had was, if anything, like McClurdy or whatever, what's his name, the main character, he had a sense of resilience. He was going to make sure this alien dies, whether he makes it or not. Although towards the end of the movie, you get the vibe he was hoping to live, right? So anyways, with that said, this notion you're talking about of this ethical question, I think it kind of does pertain to that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me from a leadership perspective is the ethical question. I think at the core and at the core of the end of the film, right? Once they've got to a point where they realize there's the helicopter's destroyed, all the transportation's destroyed, the building is on fire. They're not going to get out alive, and they have to make the choice about what they're going to do next. And it becomes a question of sacrifice, and they go to the ends of their ability. They use all of their abilities and all their resources to destroy the monster, the invader, so that it doesn't spread and infect the rest of the world. And the movie closes with Kurt Russell and one of the other guys kind of sitting together. The whole place is burning, the alien's dead, and you get a sense as the the credits start to roll that they're going to freeze to death once the fire burns out, and that's not going to be a good end for them in the long, at the end of the day. But they prevented a global catastrophe. And I think that, I think from a leadership point of view, the self-sacrifice for the sake of the larger mission is a really important concept or value that I think leaders need to have, because I think leadership is about pursuing something that's bigger than the individual.
Well, it can be. And yeah, you're right. I mean, yes, exactly. I mean, there's that sort of, one of the lessons that can be taken away is organizations have a lot of, especially very large ones, have a lot of decisions to be made that can impact so many aspects of our civilization. And it's behooving upon that leadership to try to not be narrow-minded or short-sighted in those for just the final dollar sake. Because those guys, and they were trying to survive, but those guys could have just said, screw it, I'm going to get the hell out of here. I'm going to be myself. And some of those guys did try to do that, and they died. Yeah.
And I think it's also a good lesson in crisis management and preparation too. That what happened, who could have forecast or predicted that they would have an alien invasion
Impossible.
that would take the form of this virus, right?
Yeah. Well, how do you
It's kind of like,
that?
a virus shutting the world down for 2.5 years. It's unpredictable, although it's always a possibility that something could happen. And I think one of the core tenets of crisis management and why leaders need to think about crisis management is the preparation, because crisis can come in many forms. And they clearly did not have a plan.
They did not.
For how to address a crisis when it emerged. They didn't have any protocols in place. Everything was kind of ad hoc decisions.
All out for themselves. Each person was literally out for themselves, which you saw. So I'm going to go back on what I said. I think without them having to explicitly state it, I think they were probably a bunch of mavericks who were doing their own thing, and they weren't working as a team. And it started off them not necessarily working as a team,
Yeah. So and I think that gets to the point of, organizations need to figure out how they work as a team, build a culture of trust, develop protocols and plans for when unexpected events happen, like alien invasions, and you'll be more resilient as a result of this. So this is just a case study in what happens if you don't do those things.
It absolutely is. And I think, all right, so that's enough, I think, about The Thing. And again, I recommend people to go see the movie. It's actually a classic. It didn't come out when it came out. It got kind of panned by reviewers. It was too gory, too heavy, too dark for a lot of the critics. I think Roger.
But today it would be nothing, right?
Today is.
I mean, it's still, but it's.
I would say nothing, but
graphic wise,
it's. I wouldn't say that. I actually think. Well, that's for a different show. I think the effects in a weird way.
The special effects are excellent.
Yeah.
Later in this episode, we would talk about Q the Flying Serpent, where the special effects are questionable. Yeah. The special effects in the 1982 thing still feel very contemporary. They are graphic, but not as graphic as some stuff that you'd see today. I would still argue. But it's still a fine film. And like I said, when I was a kid, I thought it was boring as shit. Now I think it's an excellent film and has a lot of lessons to teach us about organizational leadership.
And just to be clear, Dan considers himself a child up until he was 29. So you can say.
That's true.
I'm quite all right. Truly I am. Oh, can't you see I mustn't be disturbed? You'll ruin everything. My experiment is almost completed. I have discovered the great ray that first brought life into the world.
Oh, and your proof?
Tonight you shall have your proof. I created it. I made it with my own hands from the bodies I took from graves, from the gallows, anywhere. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. In the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God.
All right, Jodah. So for our next film, we're going to talk about the Columbia Pictures 1932 version of Frankenstein.
Oh, God. All right.
excited. Now I know this is going to sound cliche, right? Um, because Frankenstein's a classic film, and I want to make it very clear: we're not talking about the book. The book is much different than this film, but some of the themes from the novel, Mary Shelley's classic novel, percolate through the film, and I think have some interesting lessons for organizational leadership, especially. And I think, as we discussed earlier, Joda, we talked about what do you do with an employee who has a lot of ambition, but who might be pursuing something that is so transgressive that it terrifies everybody involved in the organization, right? And so that is our Dr. Frankenstein.
Yes.
And so so for those of you who don't know, I'm going to do a thumbnail sketch of the film. Everyone knows the story. You have Dr. Frankenstein. Now, in the novel, his name is Victor, but in the movie, his name is Henry because the producers thought that Victor was too severe of a name for the main character of the film. So they named his brother Victor, and the doctor in the movie is Henry Frankenstein. And so he has this ambition to assemble a human being based with body parts and get a brain and put that in the creature, connect it to some ethereal inner life energy thing that's in the air, and he has this whole apparatus to do it, and it charges up the body and revivificates this creature, reanimates it so that it becomes it is brought back to life. Now, a couple things happen within the plot that are interesting and really important points. His assistant, and it's not Igor yet; it's a different name in this first film. He goes to steal a brain for the body and accidentally drops he drops the container containing the good brain and ends up stealing a criminal's brain who has damage to the frontal lobe, and that gets put into the creature. And so that is maybe a theory in the film about why the creature is dangerous. Although, that is ambiguous too, whether the creature is necessarily evil or not. And so, there are a lot of interesting themes contained within the story and this film around free will and so forth. But I think in terms of the creature, and whether the creature really has free will. But I think from an organizational leadership position, I'm much more interested in the Prometheus aspect of it, because the novel is titled The Modern Prometheus. So it means Dr. Frankenstein is the modern Prometheus. And do you know Prometheus, right, Joda?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Really good band. Yep.
Oh, yeah. The band's good. So is the story by Ovid and the Greek myth makers.
No. It's the movie by Ridley Scott. That's the truth.
Well, Prometheus pervades our culture because it's rooted in Greek mythology. But it's basically about a Titan who defies Zeus's commands to not bring fire to humans, so not bring certain technology to humans. That's the metaphor, because it will elevate humans to a degree that the gods are not comfortable with. Prometheus does that by bringing not only actually fire, but in the Ovid myth, I believe also meat and meat eating to humans as well. And as punishment, Zeus has him tied to a cliff, and an eagle comes every day and pecks out his liver. You got to love those Greeks. They really knew how to punish people for defying the wishes of the gods.
Forever torture. Yes.
Well, Hercules ends up saving him, I think. Hercules ends up releasing him eventually.
Good.
So he's not up there anymore.
Okay, good. Excellent. I'm glad. And Hercules is a Marvel character. He's a Marvel character, right?
Maybe DC or maybe Hanna-Barbera. I don't know.
All right. So, okay. I'm sure most everybody, he's such a Frankenstein. First off, everybody, Frankenstein's not the monster. The monster is the monster. Frankenstein is not Victor, I guess. It's Henry. So I think a lot of people probably know this tale in one form or another. And Dan, we talked about this the other day, and at first I was like, it's a Frankenstein. It's kind of an overdone theme, but it really is Shakespearean in some respects. And it is like if Shakespeare was born in the industrial age, this would have been one of the tales that he would have probably written about, because it's basically, like you said, there's a huge representation of humans harnessing powers that are beyond their scope of capability of understanding, comprehending. And we were talking about how does that is that reflective somehow in organizations? Is that reflective? If Henry was inside Oracle or GE
or
Google, what would that look like? And what are the implications?
It's a good question, because he does isolate himself. Because there are a lot of people are saying, "Don't do this, Henry," aka Victor. Don't do this because you're defying the laws of nature. And I think getting back to our conversation a couple weeks ago with Hassan Sorrells, around the whole idea of the rise of secularism and scientific thought in the 1800s and 1900s of 20th century. You see that in this film, and you see it in the original novel, which is from the early 1800s. This idea of science being able to take the place of God, in a sense. And it's actually cut out of the 1932 movie. I'm going to show a clip of it restored, but there is a clip where Henry Frankenstein, after he does that famous scene where he's like, "It's alive, it's alive," he makes a claim to godhood, right? He's kind of taken the power of God away from that life-giving force.
Interesting. All right. Yeah.
So there is
not
that
in the original movie.
It's not. It got cut out by the censors.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, but it's there. It's there in the novel, and it's there in the film too. That and so you have. I think for again, getting back to ethics, and people's fear of change that organizational leaders often have to deal with. You can see this in manifest in other areas of our world too, right? Like I'm thinking genetically modified food, or cloning animals, or taking on scientific endeavors that in the past would have been the place of what we would have thought of as deities, right? Who create these things like food and life. But science, again, steps in and says, no, I can create a sheep. I can clone the sheep and create life out of the cells and the DNA. Or I can create food that's genetically modified so that the insects don't bother it, and we get more of an abundance of crop, right? So, and there's a natural fear there, and you see that even in manifested in the Frankenstein movie, because people fear the monster, right? It's something new, it's novel, it defies our sensibilities around nature, or our sense of nature and how things are ordered in the universe, and so they go after the monster. Because it is ambiguous whether or not it's really evil. I mean, he does kill the girl, but was that an act of hatred, or was it an accident? So I think those are things to think about.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely the story of hubris in this, and I think there's organizations have to leadership and people who work for these organizations, who can fall in love with their idea. And we see that today with technology in a lot of ways that have implications far beyond what they anticipated, and like it's out of the box, And I think even these people who've let it out of the box, short of shutting everything down, I don't think they feel it's within their power to make the changes that are probably necessary. Or that people might think are necessary. But what about there is that vantage point. But what about the actual from organizational structure? Like, who is this person? Not Frankenstein, Henry, or actually Frankenstein. What is this? Who is this guy in a company? I mean, does he survive in a company like Google? I mean, is there an issue here? Should Google allow Henry to do what he wants to do, or is there something? Are there checks and balances? And what do the other people in the company care about? I mean, the people in the town the shoemakers and the bread makers, they're not at home doing their work now, right? The town is simply shut down because they're all incensed with what's happening, and they're literally coming with pitchforks and torches to take down Henry. So now process is stopped. The company or the
let's take a really practical example. Like, let's take artificial intelligence and the rise of AI, right? Which we know is coming. It's incrementally coming. In a sense, that is a very similar concept. I could see you taking a Frankenstein story, right, as an archetype, and saying, okay, you have this guy, Victor Frankenstein, working at Google. His job is to create artificial intelligence, and he's figured out an algorithm that will be self-learning and create a personality that will replicate consciousness, right? And it will have a memory. It will be able to draw on the memory to learn and to make sense of the world. And what are the ethical issues around letting that happen? Because I guarantee you, you're going to have people outside of Google being horrified. And you saw that with recently in the news with a guy from Google who had left Google and claimed that one of their chatbots had become sentient, had achieved consciousness. Now,
well, I mean, that's what they say, right?
Yeah. I know it believes, but you can see the pushback against that, right? It's that issue of what is inherently human, and that there's something deep in our DNA, deep in ourselves, that says there's something very special and mystical about that. And should we be replicating that with science?
Right. But that's not what I'm trying to get at here. What I'm I'm thinking from a behavioral perspective. Henry himself, who took on this borderline,
it's a big HR problem, I'll tell you that.
Nihilistic, hubristic perspective of doing something, and like you said, be damned with the possible ethics. But he literally, Frankenstein is a disruptor technology, right? I'm going to use modern day technology and language. He is Frankenstein, the monster, is disruptive technology, right? If he were to perfect that, it's a version. Frankenstein's monster's version is a beta. And if he were to refine it, eventually he might figure out a way to actually transplant a person's head to another body, and so that if a person was dying, they could actually live on forever or whatever, right? It's completely disruptive. But he did it in such a way that was alienating to the people around them, frightening to the people around him, and self-serving. Would that person survive in Google? Who is? I mean,
I don't know. I don't work in Google. So, I mean, you work in the .com industry. I work in higher education. I could see that person surviving in higher education.
How? Why would they? Like, what? How do the other teachers? How do the other faculty respond to this?
Well, I think in a research institution, yeah. I mean, if you have tenure, it's very hard to get rid of a faculty member with tenure. So, and especially if they're bringing in big grants, and you would imagine in our era, if this were happening and you had Frankenstein working in a contemporary lab and he was managing to bring in big grants from the pharmaceutical companies and medical technology to be able to prolong human life.
So as long as the dollars come in. Yeah. So regardless of
that's my opinion.
What are the implications of that? Does that feel right to you? Is that, I mean, I guess in a purely capitalistic sort of structure, it makes sense. I guess I wonder if there's like a story in there around, I'm very much about teams, right? And getting people to work together to optimize their abilities to work within a team, because I think of organizations as like rowboats. I use that rowboat as a conversation piece, and you guys can be rowing against each other, not rowing at all, or rowing in the same direction. And yes, there will be some rowers who are better than others, but if that person who's better rows all that much harder, they might actually start going in circles, right? Because they're getting more force on one side than the other side. So all of a sudden the boat's not able to maybe go in the same, so they have to modulate themselves and refocus their strengths and their abilities in ways that are more appropriate for the team and the organization. And I'm just wondering, like, if Henry was worked better with went downtown, spoke to the local people, told them what they were trying to do, didn't silo himself. And I think Frankenstein's a story of communication. I think he could have communicated better, and he failed at that. And instead, he was like, "Be damned with all you around me. I'm going to do what I want to do." And so the organization came after him. And I think that would probably be what happened in an organization as well. I'm not saying it's the right way, but I think it's a communication issue about Frankenstein.
I like that reading. I like that. He definitely is not the best communicator and not the most likable individual in the film, right? And he's definitely not a team player. Again, as to your point, he siloed himself in a castle with his lackey and gets his own boss killed, or his mentor killed in the process when the monster kills him. So
imagine if he
does a lot of damage.
He worked with the town, went to the town and said, "Hey, I need some resources. I'm going to try to do something," and tries to explain the reasons and the goals. Imagine, instead of...
help me rob graves. We could all go rob graves together.
Well, instead of robbing a grave, maybe he could have had somebody give him a corpse, and could have had collaborators, and he could have, instead of it ending with, I think it ends with everything burning down, it could have ended with him starting Biogen, and if he actually communicated and got and was just a better salesperson at his ideas, So that's my takeaway of Frankenstein.
Yeah, but again, it's all about hubris, and he was arrogant and wanted to achieve the power of the gods, and you always get punished for that in horror movies, and it's a good lesson to keep in mind. Be a team player, communicate well, and check your own ambitions, and make sure that you're pursuing things for ethical reasons, not for self-glory.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah.
There's one other thing I think we should talk about. I don't want to sound melodramatic, but it's something that's been known to give a few people second thoughts about the job.
I'm intrigued.
My predecessor in this job hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker. And he came up here with his wife and two little girls, I think about 8 and 10. And he had a good employment record, good references. And from what I've been told, he seemed like a completely normal individual. But at some point during the winter, he must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He ran amok and killed his family with an axe. Stacked them neatly in one of the rooms of the West Wing, and then he put both barrels of a shotgun in his mouth.
They call you around here, Jeezy?
Grady, sir. Delbert Grady.
Grady?
Yes, sir.
Delbert Grady.
That's right, sir.
Mr. Grady, haven't I seen you somewhere before?
Why, no, sir. I don't believe so.
Mr. Grady, weren't you once the caretaker here?
Why, no, sir. I don't believe so.
You a married man, are you, Mr. Grady?
Yes, sir. I have a wife and 2 daughters, sir.
And, where are they now?
Oh, they're somewhere around. I'm not quite sure at the moment, sir.
Come and play with us. Come and play with us, Danny. Forever. And ever. And ever.
So, Dan, let's talk about The Shining.
Great film.
I
went mad writing my own little book.
Oh, Dan, you went mad years ago. Don't blame the book. All right. So The Shining, what is The Shining? So The Shining is, again, another one of my favorite movies. And I don't think I'm controversial when I say that is probably, in anybody who likes horror movies, is probably one of their top 10. Interestingly enough, it's based on a Stephen King novel,
which is the movie.
which is significantly different from the movie. It's just a different beast. If I never read the book, but I'm told I'm not going to get into it, but it's supposedly a different beast altogether.
Kind of like Frankenstein, the novel versus the movie. Yeah,
is it?
Different
all right?
Mediums. You got to change it. The Frankenstein book is totally the Frankenstein monster actually has intelligence, right? I mean, he's not just like a beast like he is in the 1932 film.
Right. And I also think that Kubrick just took license. Just generally, it's a Kubrick film fundamentally. He took the essence of something and he spun it into a thing that was meaningful for him. And it's essentially about a guy kind of down on his luck, family man who has a son and a wife. He probably has anger issues. Well, he does. He has anger issues. And
because we learned early on that he had hurt his son and grabbed his son by the arm and twisted it. And
yeah. And
I hear regrets about that.
The book goes into even more details on things where he's kind of had some issues. I think he gets in a fist fight in the book. So I don't know. And he's trying to kind of fix his life, and he's kind of got the second chance, I guess. And goes up for an interview to be basically a caretaker of a hotel during its off season, and he gets the job. So he kind of drags his wife and kid, and again, it's kind of reflecting his selfishness to some degree, taking his kid and his wife into the mountains just by themselves without really kind of asking them. But he takes them up there to kind of watch over this hotel, and it turns out the hotel. Well, you'll have to watch the movie.
He gets warned that we'll show a clip of this. He gets warned in the interview process that there was a murder had taken place at the hotel only a few years before.
A murder taken place at the hotel. The movie's ambiguous as to what exactly is the situation. It's a very strange film, but it's a good film. But the movie is fun. The hotel is fundamentally kind of haunted is what it is. And there are sort of some powers. The kid has this psychic ability to be able to communicate with people from a distance. The Shining. That's that's what the Shining is, which is an interesting overlay on the story. That's very Stephen King. And it's basically this guy goes mad. And he goes and he kind of starts seeing the ghosts, and he decides to try to kill his wife and kid. And I'm not going to try to give any spoilers away unless it happens in our conversation, Dan. But that's kind of what it is. This gentleman who goes up there.
Stars Jack Nicholson in one of his most iconic roles.
Yep.
Here's Johnny.
Yeah.
Shelley Duvall. An excellent film, like probably her best film since Popeye.
Yeah.
She was excellent in Popeye the Sailor Man.
Yeah, she was. She was olive oil incarnate. She really was. Yes, she was. In fact, it felt like olive oil was in The Shining when you ask if you. It's like,
Jack Nicholson was trying to kill olive oil.
He was trying to kill olive oil.
There was no Popeye to help her.
Nope. Unfortunately. All right. Yeah. So why are we talking? I mean, I got my ideas, Dan, but I brought it up and you thought it was a good idea. Why are we talking about Shining?
Well, I think, I think it's about fit, organizational fit, right? So I think the hotel is alive. The hotel is a living organization with its ghosts and its live personnel, including the person that interviews Jack Nicholson at the beginning of the movie and tells him about the mass murder that took place there several years before.
So the book actually makes it so that the hotel is alive, I'm told. I'm told the book is written so the hotel is actually an entity in the book.
I sense that from the film too. It might not be as explicit in the film, but I sense that from it. And that the hotel is a sense screening Jack Nicholson for a fit. Is he going to be able to come back to the hotel and murder his family? And he passes that test in a sense. He is the right fit for that job. Essentially, maybe the hotel's feeding off the blood of the families that get murdered there. I don't know. But it is about organizational fit. And I think Jack is a perfect person for that job. And I think the hotel thinks so too.
So Jack does not successfully, all right, just spoiler, about to happen. Jack does not successfully kill his wife and kid. Was the hotel correct? Was he the right fit?
I guess not. Maybe he was a failure throughout his whole life. He was a failure in this job too.
So how could the hotel have done a better job of identifying a fit? Like, where do you think the hotel dropped the ball?
I don't know. I mean, you go through an interview process. I mean, let's look at. I want to go back to we talked about psychometrics a couple episodes ago with Zoe Fragoo, and she talks about the big five personality traits. And if you look at the Jack Nicholson character, he's kind of perfect for the job based on that psychometric criteria.
Right.
You know, he apparently has low extrovertism because he's willing to stay isolated in a hotel for the entire winter.
Right.
Pretty high conscientiousness because he gets really motivated when he thinks he's going to be embarrassed by his wife reporting to the owners of the hotel that they need to leave. He doesn't want his job ruined, so he's very conscientious about that, and he's also very conscientious about his writing. And then he has high neuroticism. He thinks people are always talking about him and are judging him. So he has these personality traits and low agreeableness. I think that is the key for him. He's not a very agreeable person throughout the whole film.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm going to go so far as
one instance when he is agreeable in that film.
I thought through the interview process, he was extremely charming.
It feels like a facade. And
it does.
Nicholson.
It does. That's my point. That's no. That's my point. I think it's a good example of people telegraphing a personality that's not them so they can get somewhere. I think he manipulated the situation to some degree to at least the gentleman who he's interviewing with. Now, the hotel probably saw through that. Like you said, the hotel goes, oh, no. But he was definitely like, remember like when the hotel manager says, I haven't seen it in the years, so I can't the exact quote. He goes, would you like some coffee or something like that? And Jack Nicholson goes, only if you're going to have some. That's total agreeableness. That's utter agreeableness.
Well, I'd say overall, through the arc of the film, his agreeableness is very low, especially when he's chasing his wife with an axe.
Wait. With his kid and his wife, he's clearly, but he feels empowered to be that way with them. And, and I think that can be translated into organizations as well. Just because one person in a company feels agreeable and is, what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, I think it's narcissism, right? I mean, there's a level of narcissism in the character, and he knows he's able to be very charming in certain circumstances, but when that facade falls away, you see that low agreeableness. You see what's behind the mask that he's trying to project to the interviewer or the hotel manager.
Yeah, and I think it's important and I think we all know this, and I think that's one of the lessons here as well in this movie is that, a person like this can get in and essentially perform to get what they want, right? And he performed on some level because we know, like we said early on, this guy's got anger issues, and like you said, the way Jack plays him, even when he says something nice, you're kind of like, that's creepy how you said it. He could that character could have said "I love you," and it would have just felt like a threat. The way he was.
I love you, Shelley Duvall.
Yeah, so he was definitely. It was
a sweetheart.
He was, yeah. So, but not everybody's that way. Not everybody's so transparent, and so I think that's another takeaway here is that you can easily have one person go, I think that person's a great guy, super charming. We hired him, and then you have perhaps fellow employees who aren't in a position of power who are going, oh, this person's a monster. And so
I see that all the time.
It's behooving upon leadership. Oh yeah, it's behooving upon leadership to recognize that because oftentimes people who aren't in leadership won't feel empowered to actually bring up those issues. Now today,
they won't see it because people wear that mask around certain people.
That's right,
right, and then they let it drop around subordinates or other people that they don't perceive as being in positions of power, and so they see it. But then when the people on the top hear it, they're like, "What? That person, they're super cool.
So cool. Yeah. And they get their job done. They're highly effective. They on the backs of others.
They might not even be getting the job done. Sometimes it's just a matter of personality.
It can be. It can be. But the worst is when they do get their job done too, right? And they're effective, but they're just not good team players. They just make the other team not as effective, which in the big term, unless they're being able to accommodate for the damage they're doing with the team, it's not worth it in the long run, right? What about this? What about work-life balance? So that was my take. That was my takeaway to some degree, right? I mean, I think, Jack Nicholson goes up there and isolated himself and just started to write his big novel that he wanted to write.
Which we discover later in the film, spoiler, is just him writing over and over again. No work and all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
He writes
that a dull boy 100 times, thousands of times. He writes this, thousands of pages.
And my takeaway on that is this is a gentleman who went up to and put too much, with some ambition, and put too much pressure on him to write this book by himself, siloing him into a house with a wife who he doesn't like and a kid he wish he never had, and he doesn't feel like they support him. And so he's just going up there and trying to do it by himself, and that pressure essentially breaks him. And if I were to translate that into like general work in the environment, I think there's a tale in there of trying to, of not taking on so much by yourself and putting people around you who are supportive. Now, to be fair, the movie, Shelley Duvall's character is utterly supportive of Jack Nicholson. She's trying her damn. She was walking on the eggshells with this guy. But
she's a doormat too, right?
Yeah, but she's also a doormat. Yeah, exactly. Which is also something.
And there's ethical questions around her too, in that she lets him take them up there. She doesn't stand up to him. She knows he's been abusive to
That's interesting.
her kid in the past.
That's right.
She kind of fails morally too. She should be more protective of the kid, and she's a woman of her era, right?
She was, but let's extracting the woman part, the personality trait, which you phrased as a doormat. Good thing to bring up, right? I mean, it's important to not be a doormat in the organizations that you're in, because you can let so many egregious things occur if you don't stand up for yourself and have some courage. So I think there's a tale in there.
I mean, I think we also need to say and be, because I have direct experience with stuff like this, and we also have to recognize that it is an act of courage to stand up and speak.
That's what I'm saying. You have to have the courage.
And understanding that not everyone is going to be able to do that for a lot of different reasons. You have to have the courage, and you have to also be in a position to be able to survive the ramifications of that, courage. And to be, and Shelley's character didn't have the courage, and she had good right not to have the courage. The guy was abusive, and they're stuck up in a cabin by themselves, and she was, and that, again, at work, you can kind of see the same thing. Maybe your bosses don't listen to you for one reason. You're surrounded by toxic environments, and you can raise your voice, but all it is going to be basically Jack Nicholson coming after you, right, with an axe or a hatchet. And I guess I would say, like, it's before they get to the hotel that she had an opportunity to take action. There was a point, again, just like we talked with the thing, where things have moved to such a degree where there's no turning back, and by the time she starts to stand up to him, it's already too late. They've passed that threshold of where he's going to be pursuing them with an axe. I want to say one other thing about the hotel, and it's pulling him in, right? It wants him to become part of the organization, and not only wants him to become part of the organization as a ghost, and the kid who has the Shining and the wife, they want them all to become part of the organization. In a sense, those two little girls, the his son encounters in the hallway when he's riding his big wheel through the halls, which is a great cinematic moment.
Don't do it. Don't go there.
But they're HR. They're human resources. They are. There's two little girls in the hallway saying, "Come play with us forever." They are human resources. They want you in the organization forever, indoctrinated into the culture until you are a phantasm roaming around the halls of a poorly decorated hotel in the middle of Colorado, the Colorado mountains.
All right. Okay. So you went there. Delicate subject matter, but we can say that there can be toxic elements in the HR environment for sure. And HR comes oftentimes from, and usually does come from a position of good faith. It can manifest into, there's a form of indoctrination at times, without a doubt. and sometimes ineffectualness, right? Because HR's budget typically isn't that high. And so they're just, oftentimes they find themselves in a checkbox situation, and they're just spending the lowest amount of money they can to satisfy some sort of need, group need. And you know what? I'm going to be controversial here. I think perhaps we are, and I think companies are recognizing this, are overloading HR as far as needs.
Sure.
Not unlike the way we're talking about the BLM movement with defund police, where people aren't necessarily suggesting we don't need police, but that they are behooved upon them to take too much under that. There's too many responsibilities, that they're law enforcement, and we use them for so many other things. And so very similar with HR. And so I think there's a discussion to be had in organizations, and I think it's happening, that there are other groups that need to come out that help that facilitate organizations and their teams and general well-being that go beyond, shouldn't just all be under HR, right?
No, it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I want to say, I mean, part of the two girls being HR is a joke, although there might be some truth to every joke, right?
Right.
I have the utmost respect for HR, and I agree with you. It does feel like, I know in my organizations I work with, that HR is completely underfunded, understaffed, and they're not. And because of that, it's very difficult for them to get their jobs done.
Yeah, for sure. So hats off to you, HR. So. All right,
Jodah the voodoo wizard can maybe clone you a new HR person, a zombie HR. We could just do all the paperwork for you.
Yeah.
Guess who's on my ledge again? That little jerk.
I know you love me. I know you love me.
What are you looking for? Looking for the head. The only place I haven't looked is up in the parapets.
Won't be much left of it. Did you ever drop a cantaloupe from 40 stories?
My baby, you're gone. Go back where people dream.
Sounded okay to me.
Yeah? What the fuck do you mean?
Yeah, what do I know?
All right, Jodah. So for our next horror film that speaks to organizational leadership, I'm going to talk about the 1982 or 3 classic Q, The Flying Serpent. Do you remember?
What? Isn't that like a B film from?
Oh, it is one of those films that is so bad. I mean, literally so bad that it's actually good.
Yeah. I know. I remember it. I saw that as a kid too, and I could say I markedly had a different experience than I did watching The Thing. And I feel like they came out around the same time too. When did Q come out?
Around the same time as The Thing. It's actually very similar. Very different budgets. I think Q had like $1 million budget, and it made about $250,000 at the box office. So not exactly a success story.
What's it about?
All right. So the reason I want to talk about it is because it is a lesson in complexity theory, in my opinion. We've talked about complexity in this podcast before. And the reason I think it's accidentally a movie about organizational complexity is it's really it's 3 different movies wrapped into one. So you could peel apart 3 different plots out of this movie, and they each could be their own singular movie. But when they come together and they're woven together to the way they are in Q, The Flying Serpent, they become a story about interconnectedness and complexity and ambiguity. And so that's why I think it's kind of fascinating. So you have this creature, Q, which is based on an Aztec god by the name of Quetzalcoatl. I'm probably mispronouncing it.
I think it's Quetzalcoatl.
Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah.
Quetzalcoatl, and it is
butchering it.
Well, see, that's the great thing about this B movie, right? Is that nobody in the movie can pronounce the creature's name. So even David Carradine, who plays the detective, tries to say it once, but he kind of does this. It's Quetzalcoatl. It's Quetzalcoatl, right? And so the idea is that there's this cult that has summoned this creature called Quetzalcoatl or Q to life, and it's flying around in New York and consuming people who are on rooftops. It eats the head off of a window washer. There's a woman naked sunbathing. It flies down and carries her off because she's on the roof of her apartment building. And it's has a nest at the top of this Art Deco Chrysler building where it's hoping to hatch its offspring.
Okay.
Now we get that part of the story, so we have that we don't know about the cult yet, but we know about the creature flying around terrorizing New York. Then you have these two detectives. That's a whole nother plot line. David Carradine and I think the guy from Shack.
Is it Shack? Yeah, Richard Roundtree, is it?
Yeah, Richard Roundtree's in it as David Carradine's partner. And so David and him are kind of doing an investigation around not just this monster that's biting the heads off of people, although they don't know it's a monster yet, because for some reason this creature can fly around New York City and nobody sees it, which is bizarre. Because you'd think somebody like, hey, there's a giant serpent flying up in the air. So they're doing that investigation and another investigation about these bodies that are turning up that are their skin is completely peeled off. And it seems to be some sort of ritualistic cult killings going on. So they're investigating both of those things. And then there is another plot about this bank heist guy played by Michael Moriarty, who's an excellent actor, one of the finest actors of his time.
He's awesome.
First DA on Law and Order, really consummate actor.
DA in Law and Order. I stopped watching Law and Order when he quit.
Really? I like Sam Waterston too, but Michael Moriarty, excellent actor. So he plays this New York City thug who does heist jobs. He's an ex-junkie. And he has this baby face about him, which is kind of an interesting contrast because he's this tough guy thug, but he has a baby face. And he does these heists for people. But he won't. His rule is he'll just drive. He doesn't go in with a gun and stuff like that. They do a heist on this diamond store. Things go awry. Once again, very ambiguous what happens in the store. We just know that he runs out with the diamonds because the mobsters force him into going in and participating in this heist. Anyways, he ends up running and at the top of the Chrysler building where he discovers the egg. And that brings in his ethical dilemma because he knows where the creature's at. And instead of offering that willingly to the police because he's so broken down and beat up by society, he tries to use it as leverage to get millions of dollars from the city and other
as he should.
Perks.
As he should. I mean, yeah,
well, that's the ethical question, right? And so, yeah, it is. It's a cheese, as you can always tell by my explanation. It's just like it could be three different films, but I think there's some important leadership lessons in terms of complexity because and sense making that the film can teach us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're
all right,
skeptical.
So I have to admit, I watched it this weekend because like I said, I saw it probably when it came out when I was a kid on video. So that it is. I agree, though. I mean, it is a tour de force of like three stories come together. And what was the quote that you said? It was better than it was should be, or better than it.
There was one critic who wrote that. I think I'm summarizing it correctly. He said basically that it was better than it deserved to be.
And it totally resonates with me because it really is. There are three stories, and with a bigger budget, they could have done a very interesting dance with those three stories that would then culminate into a single story, you know. And I enjoyed it way more than I was anticipating. And the acting,
I was laughing all the way through too. You
know, and David's great, and Moriarty's great. I mean, it's an interesting film. But as far as like it, yes, there is definitely a complexity. I would argue that in this example, it's not the representation of integrated complexity that one would hope for, though. I think my takeaway. I would say that it was these three storylines were sort of slapped together that culminated in sort of a gun shootout at the end. It culminated with Moriarty basically extorting $1 million out of the city, and then there's a gun shootout, and he actually gets away with it, which almost makes it a noir because the good guy's the bad guy.
It is a noir. Yeah, no, his story is the noir story for sure, because it's all about class and money and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think, one piece I would like to highlight is the David Carradine character, the Zen-like, because he's still obviously at this point Kung Fu. He's still influenced by his role in the film Kung Fu, or the TV series Kung Fu. And so he's kind of like the character from Kung Fu as a New York City detective, kind of understated and cool-headed and almost like completely deadpan, zen, calm throughout people getting their heads bit off. I think there's one moment where their talk is like about the head being missing, and he's just like, the head will show up somewhere. If it's even still together, he's just completely nonplussed by anything that's going on. Anyways, but he, I think the detective in both noir and films like this is the quintessential sense maker, right? Because they are taking evidence and trying to make sense, the most plausible explanation of what happened in the past. And actually, he does a really good job of it. He doesn't just rely on his own cognitive schema and what he knows. He goes to experts. There's a whole scene where he's talking to a university professor about cults and about this creature. And he starts gathering information. And the interesting thing is when he brings all this evidence to his superiors, they don't want to hear it, right? They don't want to look at the complexity. They don't want to even see the connection between the cult killings that are happening and the attacks by this serpentine monster flying around the skies of New York. So I think that's an important lesson with complexity, that there can be this interconnectedness that we sometimes, again, refuse to see. And it creates dangers for organizations when you resist seeing even the most outlandish connections.
So when you refuse to see connections, what would be we can tie it to the movie, but maybe from an organizational perspective. Are there some key factors high level factors that you could think of that would cause somebody to refuse to see or want to see? I
think there's politics, right? That could prevent people from wanting to see certain connections. There's inconvenience. There's just too much work that would have to go into addressing a situation that's arising because of a perceived interconnection between two variables at different parts of the organization. So I could see a lot of different reasons why somebody would be hesitant to acknowledge, this thing happening over here is negatively or even causing this negative thing over here to manifest. But maybe this thing on this side that's causing it deals with a person you really like in the organization, so you don't want to hurt that person, or maybe it's a part of a program that you really like and you don't want to disrupt it, or it could be any number of factors. But
sure,
I could see, or just knowing that, I have to take this to the board of directors or the chair, different people above me, and they're going to be resistant to this, and I know that beforehand. So you know what? I'm just not going to deal with it.
Interesting. Yeah. Yep. Well, my takeaway from the movie was I think I would say that I could see that if I were to create a business course off this movie, it's about it's about diversification.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I would say that the movie revolves around as a company, as an organization, not putting your energy and resources or overload or using too many of your resources in one spot, and that you really want to sort of diversify your capabilities. And I'm using this term very abstractly. Obviously, if you spread yourself too thin, you can find yourself not being sufficient or efficient in any one particular thing. And that goes from your products to your operations and stuff like that. But by putting too many of your resources in one spot, you also are threatened with extinction, because you will not be resilient if something bad occurs, right? If you have diversification as a company or organization, that you will actually survive it. And the movie revolves around, like you said, this Q monster and Quetzalcoatl, whatever, and it's got this giant egg at the top of the Chrysler building, and which no one ever saw, this giant bird fly into the Chrysler building. Who knew? Like you said,
nobody looks up in New York City. Apparently,
you know what? There's another lesson there. Maybe that's the real lesson. Organizations, look up every once in a while, because you might see something that's
flying monster. God.
There's the third story. Totally. And so there's this egg up there, and in the end, it ends with them a shootout, and they go up and they kill the egg, or destroy the egg, and there's an animal in it, and then they have a shootout with Quetzalcoatl, a gun shootout at the top of the Chrysler building, and they win. And you think the movie's over. Michael Moriarty walks off with his $1 million. It's all said and done, and all of a sudden we pan around. The movie is ending. We pan around a rooftop someplace else in New York, and we zoom in, and there's another egg there, and it cracks open. So they diverted all their energy on this one egg, thinking that was it. And Quetzalcoatl said, "No, I don't put all my eggs in one basket. I distribute them."
I love that. Yeah.
And so that was the lesson I got. But I do love this idea. You're saying keep lifting your head, because I'm always saying at work, like I'm always saying this at the jobs I'm at now at times, and the jobs in the past, that companies tend to look at where their feet are and where their next step is going. And I always say, you lift your head up and look at the freaking horizon. Because if you look at your feet when you're walking, you have no idea where you're going to end up. And you've got to look.
Walking into a wall.
You're walking into a wall. And I think you hit on something here. Really, the big story is people look up every once in a while from your daily work, from your office organizational. Stop the process. You can get lost and mired in your process. And if you just look up, you might see something. You might see Quetzalcoatl, but you might see something cool and new and interesting to identify as well. So that's going to be my final takeaway that you just kind of accidentally happened upon.
Oh, wait, I have one more point I want to make about Q, the flying serpent. The Michael Moriarty character is important to think about. And I want to say this. Michael Moriarty is still, because he's still alive. He's like in his 80s. And actually recently came out of retirement to do a film. He's an excellent actor. He's a classic method actor, and really he feels like he's in a completely different movie than the rest of the actors, because he is so good, right, as a performer. And his character, you do feel some sympathy for him, because he is a classic example of somebody who's been denied opportunity, and denied opportunity.
Time and again. And so how else do you expect him to react when he has this really fundamental moral choice to make? Because it is a moral question in the film, right? If you have knowledge about this thing that is going to kill innocent people, and you withhold knowledge about where this thing is located because you know it, because you want to get some money, are you responsible for the deaths that ensued because you withheld that knowledge? I would say you are, right? But also the organization created his character, right? By continually denying him opportunity and beating him down over and over and over again, he becomes a monster in a sense. That's interesting. Yeah, I like that. And I remember that it was actually a good scene in that coffee shop or that coffee place. And he says that Carradine says, if you would have given us information yesterday, you could have saved these 2 lives. How does that make you feel? And his response was, "You think I'm an idiot?" He goes, "You're just trying to play me?" He was like, I feel like a hero. because the information given to you is going to save thousands from today on. So it's interesting how he was able to, justifications and how we can justify our behaviors. And I think I think organizations on a macro level do this a lot with, again, how on how they run their operations, and perhaps, there could be a lesson in there around the siloing of information from an organizational structure in competition, how competition can get in the way of the betterment of the world. Like how many, if Pfizer and some other company actually work together as opposed to holding on to their little fiefdoms, how much more innovation around drugs would we have today? And so one can argue competition can kind of get in the way, possibly at times, of innovation and making things better. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think also as the tap that point off is, again, as we've discussed in past episodes of this podcast, we're not rational beings. We have the emotional response first, then we rationalize our response, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's operating off of his trauma and his emotional state, and then rationalizing it to say, it doesn't matter that those two people died yesterday because I didn't share my information. I'm still the hero of my story because thousands of people are going to live because of what I'm about
to give you, and I get to walk away with $1 million. So hey, that's called that's aligning. That's called alignment, and businesses try to do that all the time. So it's and probably under worse circumstances at times. So cool. All right. Well, all right. I think that's it, man. I think we've had some good discussions. We've talked about the thing, Frankenstein,
Shining.
I want to thank everybody for joining us on this adventure. I hope it was fun and entertaining for y'all. What do you think, Dan?
I hope people leave some comments in the comment section. That would be nice to see. I'd like to respond to some.
Yes, leave some comments. Tell us if we're full of shit.
Tell us if you liked the video. Also, subscribe.
And press like. Do you say press like?
Press like. Press that like button.
Press that like button wherever that it's. I don't know where we put it.
Stab that like button. This is a Halloween special. Stab it.
That's right. That's right. Impale the like button. So, all right, everybody. Good seeing you, Dan. I will talk to you later.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Laters.